All right, welcome back. This is going to be part 2 in our lectures on ancient India. First lecture we talked about early development, the Indus River Valley civilization, also known as Harappan civilization, its rise and fall, and then the subsequent Indo-Aryan invasions, as well as the religion of Hinduism. And in this lecture we're going to try to talk a little bit more about the history of the Indian subcontinent. Again, this is going to be kind of difficult because India spends most of its time divided and very little of its time unified or largely unified. And this makes sense, again, if we compare it to something like Europe. There are periods of time where most or a good chunk of Europe is unified under, let's say, Charlemagne or the Roman Empire or Napoleon or that other guy. But for the most part, Europe has always been a collection of individual states. Greece is very different than France, and Denmark is very different than Spain. Poland is very different than Italy, let's say. And the same could be said both with regard to languages and the local cultures of the different states that have typically made up the milieu of the political situation in the Indian subcontinent. Same thing, like we've already established this with Europe. The thing that we might say has united them or caused them to be distinct from the rest of the world is their adherence to Christianity in its various forms. And in the same thing with India, the thing that's largely united them is their adherence to Hinduism in its various forms. So, with that out of the way, let's kind of talk about something that needs to be, a story that needs to be told before we can talk about Indian unification, and that is the story of Siddhartha Gautama. Siddhartha Gautama was a prince who was born around, let's say, 550 BC. And the story of his life winds up being one that shapes the eastern half of the globe in the same way that the story of the life of Jesus winds up being one that shapes the western half of the globe. So Siddhartha Gautama, like I said, is a prince. He's born to a king, and his father receives a prophecy in his early life that his son is either going to be a religious leader or he's going to be a great warrior king, like more like a political leader. And the father knows that the thing that drives people to religion more than anything else is suffering. And so he attempts to build a life for his son that is completely free of suffering. He builds a giant walled palace and keeps his son permanently enclosed in there, surrounds him with the best food, the best entertainment, and nothing that is sickly or ugly or deficient or in any way indicative of suffering is allowed to enter into the palace. And so Siddhartha Gautama winds up being raised in a very sheltered existence. And so the one thing that he wants is the thing that he doesn't have, which is freedom. And so he asks his chariot driver to sneak him out of the city, to sneak him out of the palace and to allow him to see a little bit more of the outside world. When he goes into the outside world, he sees a sick man, and he asks his chariot driver, he says, "This is terrible. I've never seen anything like this. Could this happen to me?" And his chariot driver says, "Yes, Siddhartha, this could one day happen to you." He goes back to the palace and kind of processes this. But before long, he wants out of the palace again, and his chariot driver takes him out, and Siddhartha Gautama sees, for the first time in his life, an old man. And again, this kind of strikes him. He's never seen anything like this before. He says, "This is terrifying. Could this ever happen to me?" And the chariot driver says, "Yes, Siddhartha Gautama, one day this likely will happen to you." So he goes back to the palace, processes it, and comic rule of 3, he winds up going out a third time, and for the first time in his life, he sees a dead man. And he asks his chariot driver, he says, "This is terrible. Could this happen to me?" And his chariot driver says, "Yes, Siddhartha Gautama, one day this certainly will happen to you." And this stresses Siddhartha so much that he does not return to the palace. He rather runs away, and he meditates under a Bodhi tree for 40 days and 40 nights without eating anything. And it's during that time that he receives enlightenment. He meditates, he thinks, if these things are true, then how ought I to live? And again, he is Indian. He is from India. He is a product of the Indian, and therefore the Hindu way of life, the Hindu way of thinking, mindset. But these are the conclusions that he arrives to in his time meditation under the Bodhi tree. The first and primary thing that he realizes is that all desire leads to dissatisfaction, or all desire leads to suffering in some way. And so the ultimate thing that he should be aiming at is to be completely free from desires, not to have aspirations that he would be disappointed not to achieve. He further theorizes, or I guess arrives at the conclusion that the Hindu system, the caste system, the system of veneration of the gods and religious rituals and sacrifices, the idea of aspiring for moksha, your eternal Atman soul being united to the all-spirit Brahman, that all of these things are not what you should be striving for. He doesn't necessarily disbelieve in the gods, but he believes that they are beings, if they do exist, that they are beings just like the humans who are subject to death and reincarnation, that they are not actually eternal beings. And then, so the method of freeing yourself from desire, and therefore freeing yourself from suffering and attaining nirvana, or ultimate enlightenment, is what he calls the Eightfold Path, the Eightfold Noble Path. So again, the goal in Buddhism is not to, live up to your dharma and perform the right rituals and then be rewarded with moksha. No, the goal in Buddhism is to rid yourself of all desires and therefore escape the whole system altogether and be obliterated, to not exist anymore. This is nirvana. When you live a life where you have officially attained nirvana, your reward is that you get out of the system and you get to cease existing, which might sound like a curse for those of us who are living in worlds with internet and air conditioning and antibiotics and the things that make life kind of cushy and pleasant and livable. However, for a lot of people, for a lot of human history, and especially in Asia, and as we'll see later, East Asia, this is not necessarily a bad thing. So the Eightfold Noble Path just means that you need to have a right understanding of the world, which leads you to having the right goals or aspirations, to using the right words or speech, to living out the right actions, to pursuing the right livelihood, making sure that all of your efforts are right, your mindfulness is right, and finally that your concentration itself, or your focus itself, is right. And once you have brought all of those things into alignment, you are considered to be walking perfectly on the Eightfold Noble Path, and you will, when you die, be rewarded with nirvana, with enlightenment, with that realization is enlightenment, and then you're rewarded with a return to nothingness, just complete annihilation. So this man's life inspires a school of thought that becomes known as Buddhism. He himself, Siddhartha Gautama, starts to be called the Buddha, which just means the teacher, but kind of the teacher of teachers, the highest teacher. And it gains a little bit of a following, but it doesn't become relevant for, let's say, about 150 to 200 years. The next major development that happens on the world stage, in India, let's say specifically, is brought about by this man over here on the top left, Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great makes it his life's goal and achieves his life goal of conquering the Persian Empire, using the armies of Greece, Macedonia, and marching east through Persia and conquering the whole thing. And he does successfully do that. It's just that when he gets to the end of Persia, he presumes that he will have come to the end of the world, and lo and behold, there is more world to the east of Persia, notably India. And so he invades India, wins a few battles before his men threaten to mutiny and turn around, and so he winds up turning around. But having conquered several pretty large states over here in northwest India, he destabilizes the region, and the Nanda Empire that had existed before, that just kind of clusters the Ganges basin and a little bit more of that, is destabilized, and it is able to be conquered by the first Indian major empire, or we might say pan-Indian empire, by Chandragupta Maurya. However, it is his son that winds up becoming the man who takes the Mauryan Empire to its largest extent. That's this man down here on the bottom left, and his name is Ashoka. Ashoka winds up taking his father's or his inherited empire and basically conquering the entirety of the Indian subcontinent, all the way down to the very southern tip of India. He does not quite wipe out what are called the Tamil kings. The Tamil people consider themselves to be the oldest inhabitants, those original Dravidians, pre-Aryans who had lived on the subcontinent. But not only does Ashoka unite all of this land, he also unites large swaths of what today would be Pakistan and even Afghanistan. And once he conquers all of this land, he looks back on the deeds that he has had to perform in order to conquer the crimes of burning women and children in entire villages, and he starts to feel pretty bad about that, and so he converts away from Hinduism and into Buddhism. His wife is an ardent of the Buddhist faith, and so he takes her ways after himself, and this is where Buddhism really starts to blow up. It starts to go from just kind of this northern Indian kind of local cultish type of following with, let's say, several thousand devotees to the most prominent religion in one of the largest civilizations in the world at the time. So Ashoka popularizes Buddhism, but it's not long after his death that the Mauryan Empire winds up falling, and India is plunged into about 500 years of decentralization. Like I said, this is the Mauryan Empire lasts for about 135 years, and it's at this point when it falls that India goes back to its kind of norm, which is a large decentralized set of states. And I kind of just put this slide up here to kind of emphasize how decentralized or how broken up it is. You have the Shunga Empire, the Kingdom of Kalinga sees a resurgence, the Satavahana Empire, the Tamil kings see their power grow down there in the south. All of these are Hindu kingdoms. Buddhism is still practiced as a religion, as a minority religion, but Hinduism, now that Ashoka and his empire have died, kind of dwindles in the subcontinent, and Hinduism winds up being seeing a revival, and people kind of return back to their original ways. You'll also see up here in the top left, the northwest, I guess I can say, on the map, we see the rise of Indo-Greek kingdoms, where you start to see Greek styles, or sometimes they're called Greco-Bactrian styles of coinage and statues. You also see these two statues over here on the far left. These are statues of Buddha and Athena, the Greek goddess of wisdom and strategy when it comes to war. These statues could have existed, side by side, or they were at least created by the same culture. They're stylistically very similar to each other, and so you see an interesting combination of Buddhism along with Greco or Greek paganism at the time. And this is a time period that lasts about 500 years. Like I said, this is kind of the norm for India. It's not normal for India to all be united under one empire. And so you might be asking, okay, well, I might know a Buddhist in my life, or I know some Buddhists, and I know that Buddhism is still one of the major religions of the world. So if it's not here in India, what happened to it? And the truth behind that is that it winds up moving east to East Asia, where it becomes very popular. And even today in China, in Mongolia, in Japan, in Southeast Asia, so that would be Burma and Thailand and Cambodia and Laos and Vietnam. These are the places where Buddhism is large and is very practiced in the world today. So again, I keep making these comparisons to the West, where you have Jesus, who is a man of the Middle East, and yet if you were to go to the Middle East today, there are not many people who would be Christians. Those Christians or Christianity wound up taking off a lot more in a different subcontinent, in Europe, right? And it's the same thing here. We have Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, and even though he was Indian and his religion kind of originates in India, if you go to India today, it is very sparsely Buddhist. I believe less than 2% of people who live in India are Buddhists, and instead, Buddhism has taken off and has become a lot more popular and influential elsewhere in what we call a lot of times East Asia. Okay, so we have this 500-year-ish period of decentralization. This takes us from the fall of the Mauryan Empire in about 185 BC all the way up to the rise of the Gupta Empire in 320 AD. So we are now on the other side of year zero, counting our years in the positive. And the Gupta Empire is begun by Sri Gupta, and then you also have or Chandragupta. And the Gupta Empire is a lot of times thought of as the golden age of India. The other empires that have united India do not feel as Indian as the Gupta Empire. If you go to later, something that we will not cover in this lesson because it's not part of ancient history, you have what's called the Mughal Empire, or these are essentially Mongols who take over, and it is an Islamic-led empire, and it's very cosmopolitan, we could say. There are a lot of religions that are practiced in the Indian subcontinent in the later Mughal Empire. And if you were to go back to the Mauryan Empire, again, a lot of Indians might not feel like this is authentically Indian, even though it is indigenously Indian, largely having to do with the fact that once the empire is conquered and centralized, they don't practice Hinduism for the most part. They instead practice Buddhism. But this, the Gupta Empire, which lasts from 320 AD to about 550 AD, so, taking us right up to the edge of the end of ancient civilization, this one feels very culturally Indian, okay? Hinduism is the majority religion here. You have the building of several what are called stupas, which are these large towers, temples that are dedicated to certain gods. You see the worship of the gods done on a large scale. You see advances in science. This is where in India they would have developed what eventually become known as Arabic numerals. Even though they're called Arabic numerals, they're not originated by Arabs. It's just that the Europeans who named them that gained these symbols from the Arabs, but the Arabs themselves had taken these symbols from the Indian people, the people of the Indian subcontinent. So you had the development of pi, the development of algebra, different more advanced forms of mathematics, and then you also have these Arabic numerals that are developed during this time. But it is also during this time that you have the official, let's say, canonization or codification of the official versions of Hinduism's two great epics that coalesce, and they're written during this time. That's the Mahabharata that we talked about at the end of the last lecture, and then another one that I had teased at the last lecture, and so I guess I need to tell that story today, which is the Ramayana. The Gupta Empire eventually does wind up falling around 550 AD to the Huns, and it is after this that pretty much during all of what we Europeans might call medieval history, so from about 500 AD to about 1500 AD, after the Huns had conquered and destabilized large pieces of India, they go into about 1,000 years during the medieval period of, again, decentralization, kind of returning to the norm, returning away from this this time period when you'd have a large portion of the subcontinent that's united, and back to its standard form. So we have the Ramayana here. What is the Ramayana? The Ramayana is the story of a man named Rama, who is, again, an incarnation of Vishnu. We've said that he has, I believe, 10 total incarnations, and this is the 7th incarnation of Vishnu, that sustainer, life-giving God. And here he is a prince named Rama. And Rama has a wife named Sita, who is very beautiful, and she is abducted by a demon, by a 10-headed demon god Ravana. And the story is basically a long rescue mission by Rama, and down here on the bottom right you have his sidekick, the king of the monkeys, Hanuman, who are going to the island of Ravana and trying to rescue Sita. And it's very violent and very epic and very cool, and there's a lot of interesting side missions and things like that that happen during the entire story of what's called the Ramayana. But I think the most interesting part to me, or one of the most interesting parts, is the very ending. So kind of like we had the Bhagavad Gita with the Mahabharata. That was an interesting story that happens near the end. The same thing we have here. So Rama, of course, being the good guy, the protagonist, defeats the 10-headed demon who kidnapped his wife, and he rescues her. And then at the end of the story, Rama basically says, I know I've rescued you, but I don't have any desire for you anymore. And this comes from the fact that I can't be sure, I can't be certain that at no point during your time with this demon, this 10-headed demon, that you gave in to his advances on you. Because again, the whole point of him kidnapping her was to take her as his wife. And Sita says that she's remained pure and that she has not given in to these advances, even though she has been his hostage for 10 years. Rama says, I have freed you, but not for your sake and not for love's sake, but rather for the sake of my dharma, for the sake of the fact that I could not stand to be insulted in this way. And I could not just allow him to get away with this. So I had to rescue you for the sake of my own honor. But now that you're rescued, you're free to go. I have no desire for you anymore. And Sita basically says, look, in order to prove that my piety toward you, my purity, the fact that I have not given in to his advances, I call on the gods to subject me to a test. And basically I'm going to make this giant fire, and I'm going to jump into the fire. And if I have given in, if I have become impure by giving in to the sexual advances of this guy, of this 10-headed demon, then the gods should abandon me because I have abandoned them, because I have not fulfilled my duty, my dharma, my responsibility to you as your wife even. However, if I have remained pure, then I call on the gods. If I've been faithful to them, then I call on them to be faithful to me and to rescue me. And she, sure enough, builds a fire and jumps in, and the gods protect her from the consuming flames, and she is preserved. And it's at that point that Rama says that he will accept her back as his wife, and he takes her back to his kingdom, and presumably they all live happily ever after. Interestingly enough, this practice starts to develop into the practice of what's called sati in India. And the practice of sati in India lasts for hundreds and hundreds of years, where when a man dies, as sometimes happens in other religions, instead of burying the man, they build a giant, what's called a funeral pyre, P-Y-R-E, a funeral pyre, which is a large stack of wood. They put the man on it and they burn him. And then several of his possessions are burned up with him as well. And one of the things that's expected to happen is that his wife is supposed to leap into that fire and also be consumed by the flames of that fire. I've heard this described in a couple of different ways. One, the idea is, well, if they both die at the same time, then they would both be reincarnated around the same time, and that would mean that they would find each other again and perhaps be able to live on and continue to enjoy each other's company as spouses and to be each other's twin flames, even though your Atman is genderless, they would say. However, I've also just heard this kind of criticized, which, I think it is deservingly criticized, but to be criticized as the fact that, look, now that the man is dead, the woman doesn't really have any dharma anymore, any real reason to continue living and taking up space and taking up resources, because her dharma was to live and serve her husband, and now that that's done, she should just kind of skip to the end of this samsaric cycle, this reincarnation cycle, and transmigrate into another body to be made better use of. So which of those two interpretations you prefer is up to you to decide. Either way, I think that it's fair to say that it is a good thing that this is no longer the common practice in India. But that is the Ramayana, the second of the main and most important two Hindu epics. That is also the end of our lesson, the end of our time that we'll be focusing on the subcontinent of India. And that is all that I have for you today. Thank you for watching. Have a blessed day, and I hope to see you again next time.